A young man discovers a mysterious pot in the ocean. Upon returning home and beginning to clean the pot, it suddenly begins to emit a bright glow. From the pot emerges a strikingly beautiful young woman. This woman offers to grant the young man 3 wishes, however, his attention seems to be diverted more towards her appearance than the wishes she can grant. To find out which wishes he ultimately decides on, watch until the end. Our story begins with a young man named Chris, who is taking a walk along the shoreline with his pet, Sammy. Chris lives near the beach, so walking there every day is part of his routine. Chris was once a singer but has since put his singing career on hold. After strolling along the beach for a while, Chris decides to take a break. He uses this time to enjoy a meal and shares some with Sammy as well. After the meal, as Chris begins to relax, he thinks he sees someone struggling in the water. He runs off to find the lifeguard for help, realizing that his own swimming skills are not up to the task. Unfortunately, the lifeguard's accommodation is in a state of disrepair, and no one is to be found. Undeterred, Chris decides to head into the water and hastily dives in. Meanwhile, Beon, the lifeguard, is nearby and notices that Chris is in the sea. Chris finds no one in distress in the water and realizes that this is a false alarm, endangering his own life. As he begins to flounder, he comes across a pot underwater. Soon, Beon arrives and rescues Chris, a rescue that strengthens their friendship, which includes frequent visits to each other's homes. Later, back at home, Chris places the pot on a table and goes about his household chores, living there alone. After completing his work from home, he reflects on his day. He takes a brief moment to relax as evening falls. Chris mounts his bike and heads to the local pub. It is his routine to visit this place every day for a drink. On that particular day, as Chris was enjoying his drink, he was approached by a man named Heyman. Heyman, who owned a record label, knew Chris well. He was there to persuade him to resume his music career and perform under his label's banner. However, Chris was adamant about not returning to music, despite Heyman's lucrative offer. Chris remained unmoved. The root of Chris's refusal lay in an incident that occurred the previous month with his younger brother, Jimmy. Jimmy harbored aspirations of becoming a singer and sought Chris's guidance, which Chris refused. This refusal led to a heated argument, after which Jimmy stormed out and tragically lost his life in an accident. That calamitous event led to Chris giving up singing altogether. He believed that his refusal to support Jimmy indirectly contributed to the fatal mishap. Later, upon returning home, Chris decided to tidy up a flower pot before sitting down to relax. In the process of cleaning, he accidentally scratched the flower pot, causing a gust of wind to blow around the residence. To his amazement, the flower pot began to emit a glow, which frightened Chris. Shortly after, a striking woman emerged from the flower pot. Chris was shocked by the sight. The woman introduced herself as Ruet, claiming to be his maid. Although Chris was somewhat indifferent to her statement, he was intrigued by her presence. Ruet put on one of Chris's shirts, and as she approached him, she noticed his apprehension as he stepped back in surprise. Ruet reassured him, promising to grant his 3 wishes. Skeptical, Chris muttered a wish half-jokingly, longing for a deluge at that very moment. To his astonishment, Ruet waved her hand, calling upon her powers, and instantly it began to rain. Chris, who had never experienced rain in his place of residence, was astonished. The deluge was so intense that it seemed as if the sky had opened right above his house. When Chris's initial wish was fulfilled, Rue felt a surge of joy. She was eager to fulfill his remaining wishes quickly in hopes of breaking free. Eventually, the rain stopped. Rue then asked about her second wish. Chris, however, claimed that he had no more wishes and suggested that she could leave. Rue clarified that he could only leave after fulfilling a trio of wishes. Caught in a bind, Chris had no wishes, and Rue was bound to stay. Determined to be by his side until his wishes were made known, Rue found herself contemplating her outfit for the next day, considering what might be suitable for her. Shortly after, Chris also came in. Rue questioned him once more, inquiring why he remained silent about his 2 remaining wishes. Chris shared the sad story of his brother's death, explaining that, with his brother's departure, his own dreams seemed to fade as well. That night, Chris took Rue to a familiar bar, a place he frequented often. There, they both indulged in a few drinks. Meanwhile, Beon was also enjoying a drink at the bar. Chris made the introductions between Rue and Beon before they decided to head home. Having consumed a considerable amount of alcohol, they found themselves wrapped up in passion upon their return. The next day was filled with camaraderie as they explored together. They lingered by a lake before heading to the beach, enjoying each other's company. As the evening approached, more days passed by, and a woman named Liz came to find Chris. Liz, who also resided in the area, was a close acquaintance of Chris and had been sent to persuade him to embrace his musical talent once again. Liz tried hard to convince Chris, recognizing his exceptional vocal abilities. That evening, Chris and Rue found solace in each other's presence again. After a day filled with emotions, Rue retreated to a floral paradise while Chris sought the comfort of his own bed. Upon awakening the next morning, Rue immediately busied herself with household chores. Their cohabitation had spanned several days, during which their affection for each other blossomed into love. Rue enjoyed preparing meals for Chris, who, in turn, relished the dishes she made. One evening, Rue confessed her deep affection to Chris, saying, "I love you so much." Although Rue shared her feelings, Chris remained silent. Prompted by her declaration, Rue asked, "Do you love me?" Chris, initially standing up, replied, "I can't love a genie." Distraught by Chris's words, Rue felt a deep sadness. He offered to grant her 2 remaining wishes so that he could walk out of her life. From then on, however, Chris refused to make any more wishes, angering Rue further. Soon after, Rue planned his departure and arranged to leave with Bevan, a friend of Chris. After contacting Bevan, she soon went out with him. The duo arrived at a bar and indulged in drinks, while Chris found solace in alcohol at his residence. Chris was perturbed by Rue's decision to leave with Bevan. After Rue's departure, Chris realized that life without Rue was unbearable. In the midst of his reflection, Liz approached. Chris, intending to discuss something unrelated, was in a drunken state. Liz made coffee to help him sober up. As they drank, Chris talked about Rue, revealed her magical origin from a flower pot, and confessed his deep love for her. He also mentioned his plan to pursue her after her departure. Liz's gaze curiously lingered on the flower pot. Eventually, Chris found Rue and attempted to reconcile, hoping to convey his true feelings while pleading with her to return home. However, Rue mistook his love for her as an inability to accommodate her requests. Her anger towards Chris revealed selfish intentions, and she challenged him to express his wishes at that moment. Frustrated, Chris blurted out that his second wish was for a normal girl. Rue coldly assured him that his wish for a normal girl would soon be fulfilled. Chris then told her his final wish, for Rue to return to her origin for good. Hearing this request, Rue felt bad. Chris took it upon himself to care for her afterward. He brought her back to his residence, where it became clear that Rue's illness stemmed from her desire to return, hampered by the absence of her essential flower pot. She had managed to fulfill all 3 wishes that Chris had articulated. For his third wish, Chris longed for Rue to return to where she belonged, but the fulfillment of this wish depended on the possession of a flower pot. Chris soon discovered that the flower pot was in Liz's possession. He rushed to Liz's abode, only to find it empty. At that moment, Liz was standing at the seashore, accompanied by the flower pot. Driven by greed, she had seized the flower pot without knowing how to release the genie within. The next day, feeling repentant for her actions driven by greed and deceit towards Chris, Liz decided to return the flower pot to him. Consequently, Chris and Rue approached the sea together. In a short moment, Rue entered the flower pot, which Chris threw into the ocean. The next dawn found Chris on the shore, so sad about Rue's departure that he spent the night on the beach. Upon awakening, Chris encountered a young girl strolling along the beach who asked him about his well-being. This woman bore a striking resemblance to Rue, which left Chris in awe. However, Chris quickly realized that this encounter was the fulfillment of his second wish. He had longed for an ordinary companion, and now it seemed that he had found her. The story sums up the idea that those who feel discouraged by life often see their dreams fade away. Chris, disillusioned by his own experiences, found himself without desires. This concludes our story. Remember to subscribe and like for daily videos. See you in the next video.
واصل إكمال الصغار